Welcome to a new edition of Strategic Paths, a special series on the interconnectedness between Arab politics and global politics, as well as the regional shifting balance of power in the Middle East and North Africa. First, I would like to invite you to click like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for future videos. My focus today is on the growing debate of President Biden's indecisiveness to end the Israeli-Hamas standoff in the Middle East. How far has he distanced himself from the controversial policy of his predecessor, Donald Trump, and personal support for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? Is it time for Biden to affirm his political and moral leadership and value paradigm, or just to confirm his unwavering support for Israel? Two episodes of disappointment in the Biden Middle East policy have triggered criticism in Washington and in other world capitals. One in New York, where the U.S. Ambassador Linda Greenfield vetoed the adoption of a joint statement calling for a ceasefire in the fourth emergency meeting of the Security Council over 2 weeks. The other disappointment was at the White House here in Washington, where President Biden had a fourth phone conversation Wednesday with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Biden did not show a firm position or exercise adequate pressure to push Israel and the Palestinians to a ceasefire, except, as the White House statement said, he expects a significant de-escalation today, Thursday, on the path to a ceasefire agreement. However, Netanyahu remains determined to continue in his operation until his objective is achieved to bring back what he called the quiet and security to citizens of Israel, as was reported in Israeli media Thursday. Biden's laid-back Middle East policy faces more skepticism and contestation by critics in Washington and among his close friends at Congress and also inside the Democratic Party. More than 100 Democrat members of House of Representatives have signed a letter strenuously urging Biden to boldly lead and make decisive action to end the violence in the Middle East. The president knows well how fatal and destructive the Israeli military power has been in the last 2 weeks, and the asymmetrical nature of the ongoing armed conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. As of Wednesday, Israel's strikes on Gaza have led to at least 227 Palestinian deaths, including 64 children and 38 women. Israel has said more than 3,400 rockets have bombarded its cities and towns. At least 12 people have died in Israel. This is not about both sides. This is about an imbalance of power, said Democrat Congresswoman of New York, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, on the House floor. The president and many other figures this week stated that Israel has a right to self-defense, but do Palestinians have a right to survive? So far, I have noticed 3 shifts that have emerged in studying how the Biden presidency has managed the new crisis in the Middle East. First of all, there has been a superficial lack of engagement with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, except for welcoming, as we noticed a few weeks ago, the 4 Abraham Accords brokered by Trump and signed by Israel and 4 Arab governments: the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. The Biden administration has considered these agreements as a quasi-ongoing peace process. Apparently, President Biden has made a mistake in wanting to downgrade the U.S. engagement with the Middle East now. However, as Tamara Kaufman-Whites of the Brookings Institution in Washington said, this is not another 2014 or another 2009 or another second intifada. It is something completely new. This is what the death of the two-state solution looks like. From the onset, when Palestinians protested Israel's attempts to evict them from their homes in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in Jerusalem, Biden and Secretary Blinken showed no real interest in intervening in the deepening conflict. Biden assumed there was no overreaction in his statement last Thursday by Israel. However, from a conflict analysis perspective, as Lucy Kurtzer-Ilobogin, director of the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict Program at the U.S. Institute of Peace, explains, the Biden administration did not stumble blindly into ignoring the conflict. It was an affirmative decision, perhaps a calculated risk. The little political and foreign policy benefit to gain by investing significant capital in addressing the decades-old conflict. Secretary Blinken decided there were more important matters to discuss with Scandinavian officials as he took off for a 6-day tour of Denmark, Iceland, and Greenland at the height of the rocket missile-driven war between Israel and Hamas. The urgency of the situation could have brought him to do some go in between Tel Aviv and Ramallah with a face-to-face peacemaking initiative. Instead, he decided to deploy the 5th highest ranking official in the State Department to the region, Hadi Amr, who is a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, to consult with Israeli and Palestinian officials last weekend, but his efforts failed in securing a ceasefire agreement. And like sending regular Jewish American envoys like Dennis Ross and Martin Indyk, the State Department has decided this time to put an Arab American face on its Middle East policy. Second, candidate Biden and President Biden have asserted the need for a moral vision and advocacy of human rights as a new pillar of the U.S. foreign policy. He often blasted many of the Trump administration's decisions as either destructive or short-sighted. Biden has been critical of Russia, China, and Gulf states, namely Saudi Arabia. He has positioned himself to be a strong idealist and humanist with his decision to end the civil war in Yemen and to pull U.S. troops from Afghanistan. The letter signed by the 130 Democrat members of House of Representatives have reminded him too many people have already died. More will unnecessarily perish if America does not and deal with the immediacy this violence demands. Leading Liberal Senator Bernie Sanders has argued if the United States is going to be a credible voice on human rights on the global stage, we must uphold international standards of human rights consistently, even when it is politically difficult. We must recognize that Palestinian rights matter, Palestinian lives matter, as Bernie Sanders said. The Gaza war represents a first test of Biden's foreign policy and raises the question, is he the idealist Biden across the board, or just the realist Biden when he does not evaluate his old position of 2009 and remains on the side of Israel? There have been no distinct parameters of different Biden's and Trump's support for Netanyahu, and the question becomes more relevant. Is he real Biden or simply Trump 2.0 version? Lara Friedman, president of the Foundation for Middle East Peace, said that for proponents of Palestinian human rights, Mr. Biden's approach has done too little to move the ball forward. The sense of disappointment and betrayal has been palpable, she adds. Under Biden, there is still a sharp right-wing shift in the U.S. policy vis-à-vis Israel, and it undermines Biden's own claim of strong moral character and puts him at odds with several members of the liberal wing of his own party in Washington. Rashid Khalidi of Columbia University and former advisor to Palestinian negotiators at Madrid and Washington from 1991 to 1993 said, as long as the United States ignores the bedrock principle of absolute equality in Palestine-Israel, which it has never advocated, it will continue to be part of the problem rather than part of the solution. My third and last shift is both political and strategic. It showcases how Netanyahu's maneuverings of the past 5 months have worked well in derailing or possibly sabotaging Biden's decision to resume the nuclear agreement with Iran. Netanyahu has imposed a new crisis on the Palestinians as well as on Americans and has changed the whole political climate in the region. The Vienna talks are no longer in the news headlines, neither on the top of what-to-do list at the White House. The aggression in Gaza has served as an anchor to slow down the movement of the Vienna process. Netanyahu has called the shots, and Biden is trying to minimize criticism of his approach and may end up losing some of his own political capital on both fronts: peacemaking in the Middle East and agreement signing with the Iranians in Vienna. Please include your comments and suggestions below, and I invite you again to click like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for future videos. Till we meet next time, goodbye for now.